Can the Malaysian government proclaim an emergency to sidestep a vote of no confidence? For a start, the word emergency with a capital E is different from the normal word emergency with the lowercase e. They have two different meanings. A constitutional emergency with a capital E is a legal event. The second is an unexpected event requiring immediate action. A neutral observer might have long suspected that the current administration has been exploiting the COVID pandemic to hide its lack of parliamentary majority. The pandemic is not the problem, it is the looming no confidence motion against the government. On October 23rd, the entire cabinet, senior civil servants including the chief of the armed forces and the police, travelled all the way to Kuantan. They sought the monarch's permission to declare a state of partial emergency. The purpose behind this desire for the emergency, it now comes to light, is because the government fears political instability. By political instability, the government tells us, and we are glibly told, that the government now lacks a majority in parliament. If an emergency is declared, so the PM and his cabinet colleagues argue, they can retain power and continue to do good for the nation, including passing a much needed budget. And here it comes. Thereafter, there will be political stability, we are told. Now that the government formally admits it has no majority, it must resign. Article 43(4) of the Constitution says, if the PM loses command of the Dewan Rakyat, then unless the King dissolves Parliament at his request, the PM must resign with his cabinet. Now let us get our fundamentals right. First, the government cannot declare an emergency. Only the King can proclaim the emergency. Second, when can His Majesty do that? Well, several conditions need to be met. First, we must understand what is the meaning of the word emergency. An emergency with a capital E is a constitutional event. It is a really serious thing. What does that mean? When may the King proclaim an emergency? The King may do so only if His Majesty is satisfied that the alleged emergency is grave and imminent. What does grave emergency mean? Grave means, in simple language, giving rise to alarm or a condition that is severe. Now, Article 150 of the Constitution says grave emergency means one of three things: the national security, or the national economic life, or the public order across the country is severely threatened, and that event is imminent or appears to be imminent. Is the motion of no confidence faced by the PN government a grave emergency? I think the answer is no. Is the COVID-19 pandemic a grave emergency? Obviously not. It's a public health issue and it doesn't fall within the three definition of an emergency under Article 150. So the coronavirus threat is not an emergency. The government is simply using the COVID-19 pandemic as a smokescreen. It will be a tyrant, would it not, who argues that the current no-confidence motion that confronts the government is a subversion, meaning an undermining of the power or authority of an established institution, or an organized violence, and that requires no explanation, or an act or crime prejudicial to the public. We have seen none of that, or an emergency. We have previously endured several emergencies. I'll cite a few. Tell me if you disagree with me. The Japanese invasion in World War II, the 1963 Indonesian confrontation, the 1969 May 13 riots. This is not what the current situation is. So where's the emergency? We've heard this phrase partial emergency bandied about. What's a partial emergency? There's no such thing. When one says, and I apologize to the ladies, that this lady is with child, one cannot mean that she is partially pregnant. Either she's pregnant or she's not. There are real fears that all this is a failed government's strategy to declare an emergency first and avoid defeat in parliament, or prevent the opposition from meeting or preparing for elections, or worse, conduct extrajudicial detentions. Few have forgotten the evils of the Internal Security Act, which now exists under a camouflage name. So who's advising the King that the situation is grave? It is the very persons who aim to profit by it. The Prime Minister and his infighting cabinet. The Prime Minister and his cabinet are the people's trustees. They swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. not to abuse it to create a false emergency. If they abuse the Constitution for their self-preservation, they are in breach of their duties. They disobey their sworn oath and they act in breach of trust. So the king can and should refuse the request, because His Majesty himself swore an oath not to let the Constitution be abused. His Majesty cannot stand by and see this happen. If a decision is made to declare an emergency, can that decision be challenged in court? Of course. Any legal decision that is against the fabric of the federal constitution can be questioned in a court of law. Now, there is an opposing argument that the king's decisions in an emergency cannot be challenged in any court. Its proponents cite Article 150, Clause 8. That's incorrect. Where a government distorts the constitution, it cannot hide behind the barricade erected by Article 150, Clause 8. The people's right to select a prime minister of their choice through their representatives in Dewan Rayat is guaranteed under Article 43, Clause 2. It states that the king shall first appoint as prime minister a member of the House of Representatives, that's the Dewan Rayat for you, who in His Majesty's judgment is likely to command the confidence of a majority of the members of that house. The phrase "that house" is the Dewan Rayat. It is the house of the people, the Rayat. The government has lost the confidence of the people, of the people's representative. Now, this government clings to power without the constitutional legitimacy of Parliament's approbation. Is it not the king's constitutional duty to appoint the people's choice as prime minister? So should the court stand mute with bowed heads while the government defeats the rights of the Rayat? What must the king's lawyers advise His Majesty? They must advise His Majesty that there is no emergency at all. His Majesty should refuse his permission and prevent a constitutional coup d'etat. Otherwise, we risk being laughed to scorn by other nations. We'll become a banana republic. So in conclusion, this nation is not, my dear friends, the chessboard of irresponsible and power-hungry politicians. Make no mistake, this is a decisive moment in history. Will our king stand with us, the Rayat? Dear friends, thank you very much for watching this video. If you like this video, press like, share it widely with your friends, ring that bell, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. Thank you very much. Until I see you again with another exciting video, this is GK Ganesan and this is GK TV. Goodbye.